My name is Zach Alexander, and I am the owner of the Sensable Company. And I've been thinking for a long time about the state of our society and our nation in the United States, about the state of our economy in this union of ours. And it appears to me that we are on a track of destruction. I do not see an outcome from all of this nonsense in the political theater, from all of the nonsense of people being brought into destitution. And I'm not talking just some small amount of debt or some setback in their personal lives. I'm talking people are having hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt for student expenses, for housing expenses, for car loans, for just food and groceries. And I certainly think there is a need for a larger discussion of how much of what we do in our society is really beneficial for our nation, for our states, for our local communities, and for ourselves as individuals. We need to have that discussion. That is an important discussion, and I don't want to dig into that importance. I don't want to try to reduce the importance of those very personal discussions that we need to have in small groups and within our own hearts. But there is an insidious issue that I have been facing as a 25-year-old young male, black male, entrepreneur, business owner, and I don't like the word entrepreneur. I'm a chemical engineer by training. I've worked at a Fortune 500 for 2 years. I graduated a year early out of college. I mean, there are a lot of different things that put me up here. And even for me, I've had to deal with insurmountable obstruction from people in industry who believe that, well, you're just coming in, so you need to start down here and you need to stay down there until we decide you can move up. From government that look at me in a very similar way, except they say, well, you're down here, so you're a victim and you need all of this assistance. But when it comes to giving me the licenses that I need to advance my company, when it comes to helping me acquire the funding or helping me to acquire the business status that is required to expand my productive capacity, they treat me the exact same way as the people of industry and saying, oh no, you're not ready for that. You're not ready for the opportunities. You need to be guided. You need to be shown what to do. You don't need to come up with new ways to do things yourself. You need to do things the way we tell you to. And so whether it's in industry or in government or just in society, when I am going to the grocery store and I have people looking at me twice when I say, oh yeah, I can afford this. I want to buy this now. And they say, oh, do you mean on layaway? Or, oh, do you mean in installments? And no, I'm talking about I want to buy this, whether it's a particular piece of equipment or 1,000 pounds of rice, whatever it is. When I go and I want to spend my money, when I go and I live in an apartment, and the people who I encounter in that apartment ask me questions like, oh, do you work here? Oh, you must be one of the tenants that has a live-in work arrangement or something. When I have people encounter me out in public who are generally much older than I am, because the people my age don't do this stuff, from my experience. People who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and older that I encounter in public, and they begin a conversation by saying, oh, well, if you decide to go to college one day, maybe you'll be able to do some of these things, or I'll be talking to somebody who's from my industry, chemical engineering. They'll be process engineers, production engineers, retired, usually. And they'll say something like, oh, back in my day, we used to work with this stuff and all that stuff. But of course, if you decide to go work in that field, you're not going to have those opportunities. And it doesn't occur to them. They don't realize that in phrasing these things and saying, oh, if you do these things with your life, as opposed to, since you've already done these things, since you're doing these things with your life, they're insinuating quietly, but they're insinuating nonetheless that I am not achieving something in my life by building a company, by working for a Fortune 500, by trying to do the hard things, because I know that they're necessary, and not because they're going to make me tons of money. I don't expect to make tons of money as a business owner. This is hard. If I wanted to make tons of money, I could have stayed in Houston with a 9-to-5 that I hated, working for a boss that really shouldn't be in this country, dealing with nonsense every day. I could have done that. And I gave that up because I realized that it's important for people of our generation, Generation Z, to move forward, to innovate, for not just our sake, but for the sake of our nation. I mean, we need to be thinking about our adversaries in Russia and China and Iran and other places, just our competitors across the globe who are outpacing us in technology, in productive capacity. We've long since given up our productive edge. We used to be the country where everything was made. Now we're the country where everything is bought from China. That is who we are as a nation now. And it's because the old generations, Generation X and especially baby boomers, in the federal government, sometimes in state government, sometimes in local government, and absolutely all throughout every level of industry, are looking at us and they're saying, oh, well, you can be an employee. Here's a job. It pays half of what I was making at your age, if that much. Oftentimes, we're making 20% of what our parents were making coming out of school the way we are. I have a college degree and I'm not making as much as a high school graduate was making in 1950 and 60. That's unacceptable. Well, I guess technically I make a little bit more, but the reality is I had to go to college. I had to get a prestigious degree, chemical engineering, just to make the same kind of money that you could have made working at McDonald's in the 50s and 60s. That makes no sense. When my purchasing power is this big and a high school graduate's purchasing power just a century ago was this big, we have a problem. And that is not a problem that's going to go away with any sort of government subsidy or a student loan forgiveness or minimum wage hike. That's not going to happen like that. The reason we have that problem is because these people that were benefiting from these things now realize, oh, if we give that to our children, we're not going to benefit so much. So what's easier is for us to just retain all of this wealth, to make sure we're making all the money, and they're our employees. And that's why it's so difficult for someone like me, a 25-year-old, to go and build my own company and do all these things. They've made it so that the regulations are against us. They've made it so that the insurance requirements and the logistical issues and all of the competitive nonsense that we have to deal with coming from countries like China and Singapore and Japan that didn't exist when they were coming up as young people in the 50s and 60s, makes it impossible for us to compete. And not just those things, but they're making it impossible for us to even enter industry, because the entry-level jobs require 3 to 5 years of experience. Who coming straight out of college has 3 to 5 years of experience? Just to go and work for some menial job that's on paper making lots of money, but in effect making half or less what they were making coming out of college and maybe even coming out of high school. They have chosen to do this, and they have worked for a century now. For the past half century, and really closer to the past 70 to 80 years, closer to a whole century has gone by of them intentionally disenfranchising younger generations because they understood if we can enslave them, if we can force them to work at our companies where we are the main shareholders, and if we can force them to take jobs where we can gouge the majority of that wealth that they're generating out of them, so that they're stuck barely making rent, barely affording groceries, they'll never have time to revolt. They'll never have time or energy or money or peace of mind to say, what is going on in my life? This makes no sense. We need to do something about this, because they're going to be so stressed out about each moment of every day that their mind won't be able to even fathom considering any sort of unified action. And that's a major issue. Our generation right now is facing an existential threat. And that threat is Social Security. That threat is Medicare. That threat is an aging time bomb in our country. The vast majority of people in this nation are now over 50. That is unbelievable. It's unfathomable that we have a system of government and of economy that is essentially run by people who are a decade away from retirement, if not retiring today. Do you know what that means for us, 25, 30, even 40-year-olds, and especially the people who are coming behind us? That means that we are going to be coming into a country where debt is the deal of the day. No one's going to have any money in a country where everything we generate is going to the people who are no longer generating anything. How are we supposed to support ourselves when we are expected to support 3 and 4 people outside of ourselves? Before we even get a paycheck, a portion is taken to support them. And that's not the worst part. They're taking a portion straight out of what we generate. Our productivity is going to them in direct payments. But there's debt that's being generated on their behalf, funding wars overseas, funding nonsense benefits for them that don't help us at all. And that debt is one day going to be called in. One day soon. It's getting harder and harder for us to sell our national debt. We were just downgraded by the credit rating bureaus, Moody's and other bureaus, because of our insurmountable level of debt. We have trillions of dollars in debt now. Who's going to pay that? These people who are taking all of the wealth of our nation for themselves so that they can live their few more years of retirement in luxury as the rest of our nation's infrastructure, economy, society crumbles. When they're gone, there's not going to be any more productivity. How are we as a generation going to be productive when they have drained all of the wealth that they could have put into education, into infrastructure recovery, which they make this big deal about these small dollars that they pass in Congress that are really just more debt? And all of the other issues that we're going to be facing, how are we going to push ourselves forward as a generation? We're certainly not going to retire. The vast majority of us will never even own land. I am very fortunate. As a 25-year-old, I own 22 acres. I'm out here on my land. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be out here. And it's a shame that these older people who are stealing out of our pockets and stealing from our children and grandchildren and this national debt that will accrue once they are long gone, it's bad enough that they're doing these things, but it's even worse that they denigrate us on a daily basis. They denigrate me in being a business owner. They denigrate people of my age who are trying to advance themselves in society, in the economy, in politics, because they say, oh, well, you don't understand the complexity of our nation. I think our generation understands better than any other generation alive today the complexity of our situation. We are the ones who are going to have to suffer the consequences of their actions. And they want to pretend, they want to downplay just how bad what they are doing is, not just for the nation, but for our personal well-beings. They want to say, oh, well, it's just debt. It's just federal debt. We always have debt. We have never had this many trillions of dollars in debt. And it only increases year after year, moment, each second it increases. Hundreds of thousands of dollars a second in debt at the national level, and we have debt at the state level, we have debt at the county level. One day, someone is going to call us on this debt, whether Japan stops buying our sovereign debt, whether China stops buying it, India, whether the European nations stop buying it. Someone is going to say enough is enough. They've been living luxurious lives for the past century. It's time for another player. We're already being challenged by BRICS, by China and Russia and Iran. And we joke about it. We think, oh, these countries couldn't possibly present a challenge. But when you rob your younger generation, you make it impossible for us to succeed, us to defend our nation, us to defend the ideals of our Constitution, then absolutely Russia or Iran or China will usurp everything that our country has to offer. How do they not understand this? And when you give it some thought, you realize, no, they absolutely understand this. They know exactly what they're doing. They are disenfranchising our generation by stealing from us, and they're disenfranchising our children and grandchildren by stealing from them, and they know what they're doing, but they don't care. It doesn't matter to them if they ruin America, if they destroy our nation. And it has gotten to the point where we need to start discussing what our options are as a generation. Because if we let this keep going, I only see one outcome available. The older generations, baby boomers, and even the Gen X who have sided with them. And not every baby boomer is a terrible person. Not every Gen X has sided with the devil, but the vast majority of them, I would argue, have. The vast majority of them look the other way, knowing that millennials, Gen Z, and especially Gen Alpha are being stolen from. Their self-determination, their personal power has been usurped from them. And they realize this, Gen X and especially the baby boomers, and they've done nothing about it. They try to paint a different picture in the media. They paint a different picture in society. They try to talk about how great the economic numbers are. But ask yourself, if you're my age, 25 or somewhere around it, do you feel like you're better off today than you were last year, than you were in 2020 when we were locked indoors for a whole year and a half? Do you feel better off in this moment? Because I certainly have doubts. And if we don't feel like we're getting any better as a nation, as a society for our generation, then how is it possibly going to improve? As more of these people retire, as more of them tap into their savings, which are really just debt in our name, we need to start having a discussion about how to move forward. Clearly, these older generations have betrayed the nation. They have betrayed us as their children and grandchildren, and they have certainly betrayed the future of our civilization here in the United States. We need to start talking about what it means to preserve the Union, what it means to preserve our democracy. They've co-opted that to mean fighting against Trump or fighting against Biden. It's neither. Anyone my age understands neither are looking to do anything for us. This isn't going to be a matter of right versus left, and they talk about civil war. I doubt highly that any issue is going to matter more to the people who will ultimately have to fight a war like that. The young people, 20s and 30s and maybe 40s. Any issue will matter more than whether or not we have a future in this nation. It's not going to be a war between right and left. It's going to be a war between the old and the young, the people who have everything and who have stolen our nation, and the people who are willing to die to take it back. I realize I'm posting this to YouTube. I don't know if it's going to stay up. I haven't heard anyone talk with this level of rhetoric on YouTube yet. Maybe that's because YouTube is owned by retirees. And their shareholders are retirees. The employees are retirees. And so at this point, they're terrified. They don't want people talking about this because they realize that one of us might decide, you know what, enough is enough. I'm not going to pay into my taxes. I'm not going to go and fight their foreign proxy wars. I am not going to pay into Social Security. And I'm not even going to service the old people. When they come here for business, I'm not going to give them anything. When they come looking for resources, I'm not going to share a dime of my time or money or resources or anything. They're afraid that we're going to wake up and we're going to say, you know what? This is bullshit. And we shouldn't be putting up with this. And when we finally do realize just how much we have been stolen from, and we finally decide, you know what? These people are scum. And if they want to believe that they're so much better than us and they treat us like scum to convince us that they are, well, why don't we just let them believe that on their own time, in their own world? They're afraid of a national divorce. Not between right and left, not between rural and urban, but between old and young. And frankly, I think it's time that we start discussing what our options are.